Hi everyone, this is Jed Schlackman. I'm a holistic counselor and spiritual energy healer. And for this video I want to kind of follow up on a topic that I covered a few years ago, sometime in the past, which related to a book titled Matrix 3. So we're revisiting this subject. And that was a book in a series of Matrix books that actually began way back in the late 1980s. So that was about a decade before the Matrix movie was released. And thematically it has similar ideas to the symbolic story of the movie, but it's not in any direct way connected to the movie or the creators of that movie. So in the Matrix 3 book, there was a subtitle which was the Psychosocial, Chemical, Biological, and Electromagnetic Manipulation of Human Consciousness. And I'm going to add on to that now the manipulation of human consciousness and human health, which are really inseparable. Our health is always influenced by our consciousness. So here we are in the year 2020, where the biggest social phenomena and news story of the year is this alleged pandemic, this emergency or crisis situation related to a virus, which many scientists are saying or concluding was actually altered or developed in some way as a biological weapon. Whether that's the case or not, the reaction or response to this health situation, which has been orchestrated or organized on a global level, has inflicted a lot of trauma, a lot of stress on society. It's had major economic impacts, major social and political impacts. And we can look at how this continues to unfold, so it's an ongoing story, but it's useful to consider all these different elements: the psychosocial, the chemical, the biological, and electromagnetic phenomena that are in some way impacting or influencing the situation that we're dealing with. So I'll go through things in the order of that title from the Matrix 3 book, starting with psychosocial. Well, psychosocially, whole populations are being programmed and conditioned to act in particular ways, to think and feel in particular ways. So public fear of microbes, of viruses, has been stirred up and heightened, and projections were made about how deadly this purported epidemic or pandemic was going to be. And for the most part, it appears that those projections that began in the beginning were not accurate. So the respiratory illnesses that have come through the population are not as destructive, let's say, or are not as decimative to the global population as many prognosticators had feared at the beginning. And this has its own kind of self-limiting aspect. So viral illnesses do tend to be self-limiting. They'll go through a population and produce symptoms in some people, and other people who are exposed will have no symptoms, since it depends on a person's existing state of health and their own existing vulnerability to illness. So if people have certain types of existing health issues, as well as existing energetic imbalances and psychological patterns that create those weaknesses in particular areas or systems of the body, then that's where microbes will start to spread or become active. And whether you're looking at it from the perspective of those microbes being symbiotic or parasitic, that kind of depends on your belief system or your worldview, your scientific understanding of the role that microbes play in our health. Obviously, our health and survival depend upon microbes. We need bacteria and viruses. There's trillions of them in our body all the time that are actually serving a productive purpose to help our body maintain its inner balance. And when we're under great stress and toxic burden, then those microbes start to appear as though they're pathogenic. They become more active in certain ways that produce symptoms of illness, as our immune system then reacts and has to try to control the spread of those microbes. So it's a kind of complicated situation that we want to look at more holistically. And we do want to understand that we've been conditioned or programmed for a number of generations now to fear viruses, to fear bacteria and germs and so on, to see them as the sole or primary cause of particular illnesses or diseases that manifest. So there's this both conscious and subconscious fear of microorganisms, of these small organisms or microbes that are actually essential to life and to our health. And we focus on them as something to fear, something that's the cause of illness, rather than just part of a process that's reflecting some state of disease, some state of stress or toxicity or imbalance. So that's the psychosocial aspect where we're psychologically fearing these tiny organisms that don't really have the power that we believe or that we give to them. It's ultimately our own state of health or our own state of consciousness and energy that will determine the activity of those microorganisms. When we're under stress, when we're anxious and depressed, our microbiome shifts, the balance of bacteria in our gut changes, and that change is a reflection or result of what's happening with our consciousness and our energy. So this is an important thing to recognize, to reclaim our power, to not psychologically give our power away to these tiny organisms, but to understand that ultimately we have the power. We can shift and change things depending on our own thoughts, our own state of energy flow, and our own lifestyle and diet and self-care. So if we nourish ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, then we can create health. We don't have to fear that microbes are going to create a sickness in us. The public health reaction to the virus situation has been one to promote greater fears and to promote things such as quote-unquote social distancing, which actually is physical distancing, right? So people are told to stay physically apart from each other, and yet it's being called social distancing, which seems kind of odd or peculiar. And as a result, people are now forced often to spend more time online with their electronic media, with their computers, their cell phones and tablets, and so on, staring at these LED screens that are creating an unhealthy electromagnetic environment, overexposing people to the blue light frequencies and to wireless frequencies, radio frequencies, Wi-Fi, EMFs from your cell phone, and so on. So there comes in the electromagnetic aspect that we'll get to later. And we also have the mask wearing phenomenon, which is people covering their faces so you can't see their face, their facial expression. That's another negative form of social conditioning. It's someone covering up their face, their mouth in particular, and also their nose, so it's restricting breathing to some extent, restricting airflow. And we already tend to have a lot of people who are not breathing deeply enough, not getting enough oxygen into their bodies, and that actually makes people more susceptible to illness, to infection spreading. So for the bigger picture, if we want to prevent illness and have people be healthier and more resistant to illness, we wouldn't want people covering their faces so much. We don't want to be afraid of the virus. We want to be focused on what creates health, what creates positive connections and harmony in our lives. So we want to develop closer connections, which includes physical connection and proximity to other people. There was research done a couple decades ago with infants, with the prenatal units, with premature infants and those babies that were kind of vulnerable or at risk for failing to thrive. And it was found that just having touch, human connection, was helping them recover and survive better. So having that physical connection, having touch, even having the connection of energy fields, when human beings or any other life forms are in proximity to one another, their energy fields can interact and support one another. And if you're of the same species, then it would be natural for those energy fields to harmonize, to support and uplift one another. So if we're isolating ourselves physically from other people, we're actually cutting ourselves off from that energetic support. So from my perspective as a holistic health professional, that's an unwise thing to do. So that's more of the social aspect, psychological and social aspects of what's been going on, of the conditioning of people. So a lot of people are afraid to go out of their homes, afraid to have physical contact with other people, afraid of germs, and people are doing things more online through electronic means, having things delivered to their homes. So big companies and businesses that have the resources to do deliveries, to make use of this situation for their benefit, they are thriving, while some of the old school type smaller businesses that depend on people going out and visiting a physical location are suffering or collapsing. So that's been another big shift in society that's been pushed ahead by this current situation. So we've gone through a lot of the psychosocial, psychological, and social aspects. Now we're going to look at the chemical aspect. And I bring this up because a lot of illness in our world is a result of the chemical exposures that we have. So we're exposed to things like car exhaust, to cigarette smoke. We're exposed to chemicals in household products, so those synthetic air fresheners, different kinds of scent sprays that aren't all natural. We're exposed to pesticides and herbicides, things like Roundup, the chemical glyphosate. All these things in our environment can get into our bodies and interfere with different metabolic processes, and this leads to different forms of illnesses, to accumulation of chemical waste in our bodies. And that in itself can lead to infectious illnesses, since the buildup of waste material in our body can't be maintained indefinitely, and at some point nature provides a mechanism for an attempt or effort to try to clear out that waste buildup. So when you get sick, when you have a cold or flu, or even something more severe like a cancer, that can actually be an opportunity to get you to kind of slow down and rest and reduce your exposure to stresses and toxins, to give your body the opportunity to start clearing out all that waste that's been built up there. It's up to you if you heed that situation, if you take the appropriate steps to support the healing or cleansing process. If you don't, you can make the situation more serious and end up pushing yourself into a very deeply ill state and ultimately physical death. So looking at the chemical aspect, we can see that there's continually increases in the amount of chemicals that people are being exposed to in the food, the air, the water, and products in their homes and so on. So that chemical factor is greatly influencing our health, and in turn also influencing our consciousness, since these chemicals can affect our neurological activity. So you have chemicals in the environment that can increase the chances of illnesses like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Chemicals from our environment are associated with autism, with ADHD, even with depression and anxiety. So all these chemicals are affecting us physiologically, but also psychologically, since our nervous system plays a role in how we experience our consciousness while we're in this human body experience. So all that environmental pollution, all those chemical exposures are definitely contributing to physical and mental health challenges, and they're certainly making people extra vulnerable to respiratory illnesses. And you'll definitely find some correlations between the amount of air pollution present and the areas that have greater amount of sickness and death occurring from the current spread of infectious illness. We've gone through the psychosocial and chemical aspects here. Now let's look at the biological, and this is where we consider how bioweapons are something that have been developed and implemented. Our biology includes our DNA and our RNA, protein coatings, things of that nature. And you can generate viruses that have particular interactions with a person's biology or genetics. So that's one of the theories that's being widely discussed, both how viruses or other microbes could be affecting our genetics or our biology, but also how vaccines are doing that as well. And there's been a strong push toward getting the public to desire a vaccine to supposedly end the epidemic, to help society get back to normal, when in reality, to safely and develop an effective vaccine for a new illness, it would take a number of years, and at that point this type of illness would have already dissipated or disappeared on its own. So even if the vaccine were safe and effective, it would be unnecessary. There's a lot of information anyone can find now just by doing their own research about how weak the research on vaccines actually is. The way studies are designed is really not satisfactory or suitable to truly answer the questions of whether vaccines are safe and effective, either when given individually or cumulatively. So there's a lack of long-term research on the effects of vaccines, a lack of proper data collection in regards to adverse events, both in the short term and the long term. There's lack of proper controls, lack of proper placebos used, and so on. So many major issues in the validity and reliability of the supposed scientific research and evidence in that field of vaccine development. And there's plenty of evidence indicating that people are having serious negative effects from vaccines. So why would we want to be focusing so much money, energy, and attention on vaccines when there's actually very safe, effective, natural, alternative, and holistic healing remedies that can enable people to recover from the current viral epidemic and other illnesses. So the mainstream medical establishment, you could say, and institutions of government and science have been suppressing information and alternatives. So trying to keep people from knowing about and implementing these effective ways of recovering their health, and instead pushing people towards seeking out some rather dangerous and unsafe pharmaceutical interventions, various pharmaceutical drugs and vaccines. So there's that agenda where there's a push toward getting mass vaccination, and the vaccinations we know are not really safe. They can produce a variety of health problems. Vaccines can also be used to set up some type of digital tracking system, and you could see that's not a theory. There's plenty of science and data showing how that technology is already developed, and there's the desire by those in certain institutions, certain positions of power, to actually implement that on the whole global population. And that leads toward other social phenomena where people would have to show a certificate of vaccination. So COV, Certificate of Vaccination ID, identification. You can see what those letters spell out, which is an interesting correlation or synchronicity. And if a person doesn't comply or go along, then the quote-unquote powers that be, whoever is running the technocracy, whoever is in control of that society, can suppress dissent. They can cut people off from access to the normal things that anyone in a society would want to be able to do. So you could be economically disadvantaged as a result. You could be politically disadvantaged. You could be socially ostracized, and so on. So we have these biological aspects of what's going on. So next we're going to come up to the electromagnetic. We live in an age where there's an effort to create an Internet of Things, where everything will be wirelessly, electronically connected. So we already have Wi-Fi, we have mobile phone towers, we have satellites that are radiating these frequencies all over the planet. And we've had the introduction, mainly beginning in 2019 and expanding in the current year of 2020, of this 5th generation of wireless mobile phone technology. So think of your phone ringing now, and when you pick it up, your phone is radiating certain frequencies to communicate with a cellular tower. And we've had a certain range of frequencies up until now, and now it's expanding to higher frequencies that could be more intense and have an even stronger effect on our biology, on our own human energy field and electromagnetic field. So people doing epidemiological research have found some clear correlations between the implementation of this 5th generation millimeter wave technology and the appearance of clusters of the current spreading respiratory infections. So it's very possible that these frequencies are having an impact on biology and physiology, and the stress or toxicity that occurs is making people more vulnerable to showing signs of illness when they're exposed to these viruses or other microbes. So it's instigating or facilitating these illness processes in people who may have other risk factors or vulnerabilities. And of course, electromagnetic frequencies also can interact with our nervous system and thereby with our consciousness. You may have seen things about Elon Musk and the exhibition or demonstration of Neuralink technology, where the human brain, in a sense, the mind, is being interfaced with these frequency-based technologies. So this artificial intelligence-oriented future is on the horizon, this transhumanist concept of merging man and machine. And that's certainly a potential, an agenda that we can look into as we consider what's playing out right now. The current situation could push things in that direction as people become more accustomed to, more adapted to interacting constantly with technologies, with their computer and mobile phone screens, with wireless devices, with body scanners and facial recognition and all these different things that are growing in their influence. So we can all look at this and ask ourselves, is this the future that we desire? Do we want to be merged with technology and artificial intelligence? Or do we want to retain our humanity, our connection with nature, and with our innate spiritual intelligence? That's really where our freedom comes from our connection to life itself, not from being interfaced with some programmed computer or electronic device. We can use technology certainly for some forms of convenience, but once we get past a certain point in our dependency upon them, we start to, in a way, enslave ourselves and take away our own freedom, our own individuality and autonomy. So I encourage all of those watching this to actually think about these subjects, to consider how the psychosocial, biological, electromagnetic, and chemical aspects are all playing out and pushing us in a direction that may not be for our psychological or spiritual benefit. You may also want to read some of those books I've mentioned, the Matrix books, and the first one was focused on extraterrestrial phenomena, the Matrix 2 volume. Then there was Matrix 3. Matrix 4 focused more on paradigms of consciousness and different New Age type concepts. And Matrix 5 focused on looking at our human incarnational experiences and how they fit into a broader metaphysical construct or metaphysical overview of our existence. I appreciate each of you for taking your time to view this video. You can visit my website to learn more about some of these subjects. phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.